Now, if you want to ski or snowboard off-piste in powder snow and make fresh tracks, you're going to have to ask yourself the question, how do I know if it's going to avalanche or not? To answer that question, you're going to have to build up a skill set, and one of the most important skills to learn is how to read slope steepness. The vast majority of human-triggered avalanches occur on slopes between 30 and 45 degrees. Less than 30 degrees and the slope isn't steep enough for gravity to overcome friction, and avalanches are very rare. Bear in mind that 38 degrees is the tip of the bell curve, the bullseye most dangerous gradient for human-triggered avalanches. On slopes of more than 45 degrees, small avalanches are so frequent that larger, more dangerous ones are uncommon. Since avalanches are so sensitive to slope steepness, knowing how steep a slope is allows us to calculate the avalanche risk. So here are 6 ways that you can measure the steepness of a slope.
In order to have good days out skiing and snowboarding off-piste, your most important decisions will be made before you leave the house. First of all, in order to find out the steepness of the terrain you intend to visit, you can look at paper maps and measure how closely the contour lines are spaced. Alternatively, you can use FatMap's 3D mapping software. Find the terrain and overlay coloured layers to show slope steepness in either 5-degree increments or graduated colours.
Now, once you're out in the mountains and you want to check whether the terrain you're on is more or less than 30 degrees, you can use a trick with your poles. Firstly, make sure they're the same length as each other, and then use one pole to mark out one pole's length in the snow down the full line of the slope you want to measure. Now, pick it up and make a triangle. All 3 sides of the triangle are the same, so it's an equilateral triangle. Now, if this downhill pole is vertical, then we're on a 30-degree slope. Now, if the slope's a bit steeper and the downhill pole is leaning down the hill, it's more than 30 degrees. Or if the slope is a bit more gentle and it is leaning into the hill, then we're on a slope that is less than 30 degrees. So here's an objective way you can use your poles to measure the steepness of the slope. So firstly, you're going to want to use a bit of tape to mark the halfway point and a quarter-way point on your poles. If your poles are the same length as each other and you make a right angle and the other ends of the poles are touching the snow, we can see that that's going to be about 45 degrees. But if I come to a less steep part of the slope and I make that right angle again and I'm on the quarter point, which is here where my left hand is, then that's going to be about 37 degrees between the poles. And if I come to a less steep bit again and the right angle comes to the halfway marker on the other pole, then that's about 26.5 degrees. Or if you're in really steep terrain and it is more than 45 degrees, and we've come to the quarter marker in this direction, then that is more like 53 degrees between your poles. Now, these 2 tricks with our poles only tell us the steepness of the slope between the 2 poles. Now, it's often more useful to measure larger sections of the slope. So one way we can do this is with a smartphone app. I'm using one called Angle. And if you align the horizontal length of the phone with the angle of the slope, you can then measure the angle of larger sections of that slope. So I'm reading here about 31 degrees. Now, better yet, I can leave my phone in a warm pocket and preserve the battery, and I can use an inclinometer on a compass to measure slope angle. Now, this is slightly more reliable and I'm not dependent on my phone battery, and I can use my inclinometer to measure the gradient of the slope. Now, bear in mind that you need to get your inclinometer parallel with the slope angle, so that might mean getting quite low against the snow or pointing it at something which is 6 foot high at the bottom of the slope. Now, don't forget that when we're measuring the steepness of the slope, it's not only the slope that we're on that matters, it's also the slopes that we are near. It's no point measuring a 20-degree slope beneath your feet and assuming you're safe from avalanche danger if you're standing beneath 100 meters of 38-degree slope. So pay attention to locally connected terrain as well as the terrain you're on. So get out there, guess the steepness of some slopes, and then objectively measure those slopes to build your ability to read slope steepness, because this is a very useful skill for you to be able to calculate the risk of avalanches.